Hello HEMA enthusiasts, I'm Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Now, quick disclaimer, I've got a shirt that's from the Iron Door Collective, but just to let you know, I'm just representing myself, I don't actually represent them. However, that aside, let's get to the topic at hand. So if you're thinking of joining a historical European martial arts club, there are a few things that you should bear in mind in terms of the equipment you should get and getting started. So firstly, when you're joining a club, usually it's good to have some basic safety equipment. Now, there are various things that people recommend, and it depends on what weapons you're fighting with, how, those sorts of things. But for most systems, there are two most important items that you should buy. And those are a fencing mask, so that's ones like this. This particular example is a Red Dragon mask. And inside I've got these, which are the Red Dragon gauntlets. And it's just a simple fact of health and safety. Things like the fingers are quite easy to break, dislocate, cut open, things like that. So it's really important that you do have hand protection, especially since most sparring is done at reasonable martial intent or sometimes even full force. And with something like a helmet, same sort of thing. The eyes, ears, nose, those sorts of areas are easiest to damage. So it's really important that you do have this sort of equipment. And if you are thinking of doing any sparring or actual intent with your practice, even if you're just practicing specific techniques against someone, it is strongly recommended that you do have this sort of safety equipment so that you don't end up hospitalised, even if you're practicing in private with a friend or family member or something like that. Now, when it comes to the weapons and things, it again depends on the types of systems, but most clubs tend to have longsword practice. So I've got a couple of examples of swords, and here is the Rawlings line. Now these are nylon, they're fairly flexible and bendy, they've got unscrewable attachments, so you can take the quillons and things, you can take the handles and change them, and even swap the pommels around. So it's quite useful for that. But apart from that, we've got these, which are called the Black Fencer longswords. They're a lot stiffer, they're a bit more realistically weighted, and they even have things like a steel pommel and quillons, even on the other models, regardless of which type of sword it is. Now, again, different clubs will be using different ones, and it's best to have a look at matching your equipment to what the club has, because if you had one particular type of weapon and everyone else in the club has a different type, you're probably not going to be matched that well. However, I've done videos about these two particular ones, and again, it's best to discuss with your club about specific weapons, but these two are good examples that you can get started with. So I've done the videos about the Rawlings line and about the Black Fencer line, as well as I've done reviews about the Red Dragon gauntlets and mask. Now, beyond that, if you're male, it's recommended you get a box to protect the groin as well. In terms of clothing and things, of course, there aren't usually strict regulations on what clothing you should wear, but it's generally recommended you have something that's comfortable and mobile. So certain trousers, especially things like jeans, aren't quite so good, because if you're going to really extend out and maybe try to thrust or do something like that, you could end up lunging quite far. You might think this almost looks like something you'd do in sport fencing, but if you're moving around and fighting with a lot of intent and want to get out of the way of an opponent attacking you and want to take a new line to cut or thrust at someone, you could well be lunging and moving around quite explosively. So if you have things like chinos or jeans or trousers that are a bit restrictive and might well rip if you stretch out too far, it might be recommended you go for something else. So of course, obviously, sports types of trousers, so things like leggings, jogging trousers, things like that are fine, but you can see here I'm wearing just ordinary cargo trousers, so again, you don't need to have a special sports kit or anything like that, but just things that you don't mind moving around freely in, and that you don't mind too much potentially getting damaged, getting quite grubby, because you may well bleed, you may well end up with, rubbing in a lot of dirt, especially if you're outside. So just bear in mind that you may well experience quite a bit of damage happening to those clothes. Same with above. Obviously don't have things like shirts or jumpers or sweaters, other items that are going to be too restrictive. You should have fairly full movement because you're going to be in a variety of very outstretched positions, and if you've got something that's restrictive, you'll either be very held back and not able to fight properly, or you may well rip it, and again you'll be destroying your clothing just doing ordinary practice. So that's one thing I'd recommend. Besides that, I would recommend that you have any fingernails cut fairly short. Yes, I mean you could fight with things like longer nails, but it's really not recommended. You could end up getting something split all the way down back into the finger and cause all kinds of nasty stuff, so best to keep them short. And in terms of things like hair and beard, it's not so bad. Just make sure that nothing's covering your face, nothing's going to be obstructing your vision, and making sure that of course you're comfortable with the fact that if you're going to get in a grappling situation, although generally it's frowned upon to go around just pulling people's hair, you do want to be aware of the fact that you may well get tangled up, and you have to be aware of this and, you know, not worry about the fact that you may well get some hair starting to pull a bit, especially in tight grapples with people. When it comes to your first time in training, be aware of a few things, like obviously where your weapons are pointing. So you'll see this position now, it looks pretty cool, yeah, sword on your shoulder, but actually moving around, you may well be hitting people. So it's best recommended that if you have a long weapon, such as a polearm or a sword, you should probably try to have it either pointing high or pointing low at the ground, because that way you can carry them around fairly easily and you're not going to be poking people's eyes out. Whereas if you have them, for example, just back like this on the shoulder, you could be swinging around into people, you could poke people's eyes out. It's just generally going to make you not very well liked in a club if you're going around causing injuries by accident your first time you're there. Besides that, I'd recommend not having too much to eat, because you are very likely going to be doing quite a bit of exertion. So I usually recommend that meals at different times of the day be perhaps larger, and then whatever's close to your training time you can just have smaller. Obviously you can have a lot after your training, but anything before your training you should probably have a lot lighter meals, even if it does mean you go a bit hungry. Better that than being sick everywhere, you know? Not that I've seen that happen in a club yet, but it's a very realistic possibility. In terms of your attitude towards the people like trainers, obviously most people are very accepting of any questions, so if you do feel unsure or you want something explained again, perhaps you're struggling to understand a particular thing, that's fine, just feel free to ask people, but try not to do things in the middle of, for example, an instructor telling everyone about something. If you are going to ask, perhaps try to find maybe people are splitting up into groups and are training with each other, and then maybe ask them at that point perhaps. Or if it is in the middle of the actual sort of instruction initially, just try to keep your questions quick and simple and make sure they are important. Besides that, obviously some coaches have different attitudes, so I mean some coaches are right if you start questioning, you start asking about what about this context, couldn't this counter it, that sort of thing. Others are less tolerant, so try to be aware of the type of personality people have, and that'll help you get along better. Because there's one thing that is important with clubs, and that's making sure to get along with people. If they're happy with you and you're being more patient with them and they can be more patient with you, you're going to end up learning more and having a better time than if you're just going around causing a lot of antagonism. But yeah, that's generally it. Besides that, of course, be relaxed. People know it's your first time. We've all been there. I've been there. Your head coach has been there. All the people you're training with have been there, or actually are there. So don't worry about the fact that you're going to be new and inept. Perhaps a person of 2 left feet, someone who doesn't know their blade from their pommel. Doesn't matter. They're going to know that and be able to adapt to it. And they'll make sure to teach you right from the beginning up. So yeah, apart from that, that's all. So have a good day, and of course, have fun. See you guys in the next video.